Hi, welcome to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. Have you ever wondered about taking a pile of rusty, old, vintage motorcycle parts like this and making them into something like this? We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to the garage. If you've been watching the program, and I hope you have and hope you're enjoying it, we're building a custom mid-70s BMW Airhead from a bunch of parts we have here in the shop. These bikes are called Airheads, by the way, because the heads themselves, there's a head on each side, the pistons and the cylinders stick out the side of the bike. There's a head on each side, and those heads are completely air-cooled. Motorcycles in the old days were air-cooled, and then they gradually adopted an air-oil mixture, where there's some airflow and there is also an oil cooler to take some of the heat away from the oil. And then ultimately they went to liquid cooled. But this vintage mid-70s BMW is going to be an airhead. I like airheads. I just like the style. The bikes that I showed you in the first episode where we had the green BMW, the vintage red BMW, and the black Cafe Racer, those were all airheads. BMW later went to an oil cooler, and those are referred to as oil heads, and then they went to oil cooler as well as liquid cooling, and those are called wet heads. Just the nomenclature. I like the old airheads. So we're building a mid-70s airhead, and we've been working on going through all of our parts, and we're starting to make decisions on what we're going to be doing, what this bike is going to look like. Today I've got the tank back on the bench here. We're not ready yet to send this tank out to painting, but we're thinking about it because when the time comes to paint, I don't want to spend all my time thinking about what I want to paint it then. I want it to know in my mind what this bike is going to look like. And some of the decision we make now will be affected by that and vice versa. So I want to have in mind an idea for the tank. Last episode, I showed you some very bright red paint from a German sports car, a Porsche. This is a German bike, so it's fitting to use paint from a German sports car. It's a very, very bright red. Now, this tank has not yet been painted. This is the original paint, or not yet been repainted, I should say. This is the original paint. It's red. It's kind of a rust brownish red. It's a pretty color, but it's rust brown. And I was talking about wanting some contrast in the tank, maybe having a two-tone where I'd have some red and some white. And I've been playing around with that. I just want to show you what my thinking is now. I did some looking online, and you can see that I've got a piece of white paper taped onto this onto this red tank here. And there's a shape here. You can see this indent, and there's just kind of a natural shape where BMW actually had two-tone tanks back in the day where they had one color here, and they had kind of faded it, a soft edge, faded it to a lighter color on this larger section, or this section that sticks out a little bit. I think I want to go with a stronger contrast than that. I don't want to have a sharp edge, but I do want to use a red and a white. And so I just took some paper, taped this on here, kind of get an idea, look at it from different angles to see what I might want to do. So this is the overall shape. You can see it's got a bit of a kind of a swoop here. It lines up with this cutout, and there's a pinstriping on here originally, so it kind of traces the edge of that pinstripe and comes around. And I think it could look good. It'll make the tank look a little bit less bright. I mean, the red is going to really be bright, so this will take a little bit away from that, but it'll be a little more dramatic than just one color. So I'm thinking about white here and red here. I was contemplating white here and red here. I may try that, but I kind of like the white. And this is somewhat reminiscent of what BMW did in an original paint scheme. So to go with something new is fine, but to be kind of reminiscent of what they did back in the 70s could be good too. So we're thinking about that. If you have any comments, any ideas, let me know. I'm also contemplating what to do for the logo here. Now, I've got a piece of just silver paper taped on here. When you saw the Moto Guzzi before, in the first episode, I had an emblem made. You'll never see that anywhere else. It's a custom emblem that says Moto Guzzi on it, but there was no paint. It was just aluminum that was machined with the logo and the machining, or machined into the aluminum disc. And one idea I had was to try that here, just to have aluminum milled with the BMW logo. And the BMW logo looks like this. Same on the motorcycles as on the cars. It's got a black ring, the BMW letters, and these four corners here on the circle, alternating white and blue. So I could do that all in aluminum. I'm thinking about that, but as I look at the tank, I'm feeling like the red and the white and the plain aluminum here is not quite enough. So I may actually go with the standard BMW logo, which would look kind of like that. Again, if you have any ideas or suggestions, let me know what your thoughts are. But I'm thinking I might go with that. That'll break up the white a little bit, and it will, again, be reminiscent of the original, because these were the kind of emblems that were on the tanks originally. And a little more color to it, a little more definition. Again, the tank is large, and it could dominate the bike. So by breaking it up with the white, and maybe further breaking it up with the logo, it might look a little bit less large. Now, it's nice to have a large tank. That'll give us range when we're riding. We'll be able to go a longer distance. But we might want to break up some of the aesthetic aspect of the size of the tank with a two-tone paint scheme and using the standard original BMW logo. So those are our thoughts on the tank. I wanted to show you that first. We're going to do some unboxing today. I'm going to get something out here in a moment. We'll take a look at that, and we'll see where we're at. I've been ordering parts, and parts are starting to come in. So now we're starting to see these parts trickle in, and we're getting more of an idea of what this bike is going to look like and how it's going to take shape. Back in a moment. Okay, we're ready to do some unboxing today. We've been ordering parts, getting parts in from all over the country. And this is the first package that came in. And we're excited to see what it is. I know what it is because I know who it's from. But these are some good parts for this new bike. We have a son. My wife and I have a 6-year-old boy named Isaac. And we'll get him on the video one of these days. He may burst in here at any moment, but he's not here right now. But one of his favorite things these days is model trains. He loves trains. Actually, not just model trains, but big trains too. Really into trains. And he watches videos of people who have train collections or make train videos or whatnot. And there's a guy that he watches who has a show called Eric's Trains. And Eric, if you're watching, thank you very much. My son loves your program. And we're going to borrow something that you do there. Eric collects Lionel trains, and when he gets some new trains in, he unboxes them. And it's very exciting. Our son loves to see that, and it's kind of fun for us too, because we don't know what he's opening. He probably does, but we don't know what he's opening. He unboxes it. One of the things that he does is he opens it with a new knife from his knife collection. I've not seen his knife collection. I don't know if he has a video about that, but he always has some kind of new knife. So we're borrowing a little bit from Eric. Thank you very much, Eric. So don't have a knife collection, but we do have a box cutter here, and we're going to open up this package from Sudco International. Sudco International is an importer. They're on the West Coast, and I buy a lot of parts from them. By the way, I will from time to time mention vendors or products. I get nothing from them. This is not. There's no sponsorship. There's no nothing. But they are very knowledgeable and they're very helpful, and I'm happy to give businesses an endorsement. Just saying what my experience is. My experience with Sudco is good. So we're going to open this box up, and I ordered carburetors from Sudco. Now, we talked about carburetors on a previous show, and I explained some of the choices that we have. We have the original Bing carburetors. They have some advantages, some disadvantages. There are others that might be more optimal. We also had Mikuni carburetors, Mikuni round slide carburetors, and I said we're going to be getting, rather than the round slide, because the round slides we have are a little small. They're 36 millimeter. We wanted 38 millimeter. So I decided if I'm going to order new carburetors, I'd rather get the top of the line, which is, again, a Mikuni carburetor, but a flat slide carburetor. So we've got two carburetors in here. Mikuni Racing. We should get a lot of performance out of these. Let's take a look and see what we got. These are identical. By the way, some carburetors, some Mikuni carburetors and other brands come with left and right carburetors. In this case, they're both the same. They're both lefts. They don't have a right carburetor. So here we go. This is a brand new, state-of-the-art Japanese-made carburetor with a flat slide. The round slide one I showed you, I moved the piece up and down inside of it, and the piece that moved up and down was round. This one is flat. It allows for more even movement of the air through the venturi. And we're going to talk about carburetor technology and take a look at some comparisons between carburetors on a future episode. But for now, we do have these beautiful Mikuni flat slide carburetors, which will have an aesthetic aspect to them on the bike, and they're also going to have a great performance aspect on the bike. We should get a lot out of that 1000cc motor. Carburetors are interesting. I would call this state-of-the-art, old school. Carburetors, you find them certainly on lawnmowers and various things today that you buy, snow blowers, chainsaws, whatever. But in terms of vehicles, cars or trucks or motorcycles too, manufacturers went away from carburetors, generally speaking, over the years and have adopted electronic fuel injection. Electronic fuel injection, it's great. It's probably more efficient. You can program the electronic fuel injection and maybe get even more out of it than you can out of a great carburetor like this. But there's something about carburetors. I really like carburetors. Carburetors make sound. When you open up the throttle, you can hear the air rushing into the venturi. And everything works on a carburetor based on physics. There's no wires. There's no electronic connections. Of course, electronic fuel injection, it's computer controlled. And there's wires and everything electronically that's controlling it. This works just by physics. And if you remember high school physics class, you learned about a guy named Bernoulli. Bernoulli developed what's called the Bernoulli principle, which said that as a fluid is accelerated, its relative pressure drops. So air is considered a fluid from a physics standpoint. And there's a venturi in here. So there's a narrowing. Air will come in this end through the air filter or the pod or whatever, and it goes through a narrowing on the carburetor. As the narrowing occurs there, the velocity of the air increases, and that creates low pressure inside the throat of the carburetor here, which then sucks fuel out of the bowl. And the carburetor meters that fuel so that by the time after air comes in this side and fuel and air come out of this side into the engine, it's the proper balance, proper mixture by weight of the fuel and the air to get the optimal burning in the engine. But it works all based on physics. There's no electronics, just Bernoulli's principle and various passages in here that we'll talk about more in the future and we'll take a look at. But this is one of the carburetors. Like I say, they're identical. It's got a choke mechanism here. The choke on this type of carburetor, different from maybe a lawnmower choke. A lawnmower choke will actually close a butterfly valve, just a flat disc, over the opening to the air, and that will choke off the air, which changes the mixture because the fuel will still flow, same fuel will flow, but less air, and that richens the mixture, makes it easier to start. These carburetors have a similar function. It's called a choke, but it doesn't actually choke off the air. Instead of the valve being on the air side of the carburetor, where a choke butterfly valve would be, and we'll talk about carbs, like I say, more at a future time. There's so much you can talk about with carbs. I love carbs. Not just the kind you eat, but the kind you ride motorcycles with too. I like them both. But this one has an enrichener, so when you pull up this valve, it actually, instead of cutting off the air to change the mixture, it increases the fuel. So this will increase the fuel to make it easier to start. So the same amount of air will come in this side, but there'll be more fuel coming in this side. Then after engine warms up, we can turn this off. Then in here, we'll have a cable running, which will attach to the top of the slide so that as we use the throttle, that slide will go up and down. As the slide opens, it lets more air in there. More air means more fuel. And when you crank the throttle open, that valve will open and more air and fuel will flow into the engine and we'll have more power. This carburetor, you notice too, it has all these pink hoses on here. These hoses are primarily vent hoses. There's one down here that's an overflow hose, but these two are just letting atmospheric pressure into the engine, into the carburetor rather. And they're put in place so that the air intake, it's not really an intake, it's just a pressure intake, can be out of the realm of flying dust and debris or whatnot. I usually take these off and I don't ride that aggressively, or I don't ride in bad weather typically, so we can let the hoses be off here and we're not worried about water getting in there. And it would change the aesthetics a little bit too. Don't want to use the pink hoses. Then here we've got an idle adjustment screw. We'll raise and lower the idle to get it set just right. And over here we have a mixture adjustment screw. When it's at idle, we can adjust exactly what the balance is going to be between fuel and air. Now, before I install these carburetors, I ordered these carburetors, by the way, specifically jetted. It's called jetting. There are jets inside here, which are just little screw, look like a little screw with a tiny hole in the middle. And that hole is a fuel passage. And if you want to change the fuel passage or the size or the volume of the fuel, you just take out one of those screws and put in a different one with a different size hole in the middle. Those are called jets. And I ordered this carburetor jetted for this 1000cc BMW motor. I don't know what the jets are. We're going to take it apart and we're going to take all the jets out, make sure that they're both the same. They should be. Make sure they're both the same. I've never had a problem finding two carburetors that weren't the same in terms of what number of jets they put in there, but I want to catalog all the jets. I keep a notebook whenever I work on a carburetor, my bike or a customer's bike or whatever. I make sure that I keep notes and records of the jets that are in here. There's a pilot jet, there's a main jet, there's a jet needle, there's a needle jet, and there's a type of slide. All these things you can change out and put different ones in. So I want to have a catalog, make sure I know what's in here, so that if I find the bike is running good at idle, but not great at top end, or vice versa, or whatever, I can go back and I can see what jets are in there, and I can say, okay, I want to change a jet, pilot jet or a main jet, make it a little bigger, or a little smaller, or raise the needle, or change the needle jet, or whatever. I know what my baseline is so that we can make appropriate changes. So that's it. We've got a second one here. I'm sure it's the same. There we are. Like I said, they are identical. There's not a left and a right with these. We'll have to fabricate an attachment for the engine. We'll get the engine out on a future episode and see how we're going to connect these things. May not even do it until we get the engine in the bike. But beautiful carburetors, state of the art, old school. Nice thing about these is it's brand new. You work with an old carburetor from the 70s, you have old parts. Someone may have taken it apart. They may have done who knows what to the inside of the carburetor over the last 50 years, trying to make it perform better. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But those carburetors can't always find parts for some of those old carburetors. The Bing carburetors that would be on this would have been on this motorcycle, we can find parts for it. But for some of the Japanese bikes, you really can't. It's hard to find parts. And so rather than replacing parts, sometimes people have just modified the parts. So you don't know what you have in some of those old ones. Nice thing about this is that it's brand new and parts are available. We can fine tune these carburetors so we can fine tune that engine and not have to worry about the electronic aspect, because there is no electronics. I love carburetors. A brand new flat slide 38 millimeter carburetors for this 1000cc engine. They're beauties. All right, we're going to work on the forks next. We've got some parts in on the forks. I've cleaned those components from the last show, and now we're ready to start assembling those. Back in a moment. Okay, in our final segment today, we're going to reassemble the forks. The forks compose much of the front end for the motorcycle. The two forks we saw last time fit into the triple tree, and they support the front wheel, the axle, so the wheel can rotate and hold the brakes and whatnot. So we took the forks apart in the last episode, and in the interim, I've cleaned them, I've inspected them. They're in pretty good shape. There is some chafing on the shiny tubes here, these fork sliders that go in and out of the lower fork tubes. There's some chafing on there, but they're serviceable. And when we're building a bike like this, we have to be careful about where we want to spend our money. Those carburetors I showed you, for instance, were fairly expensive, but we needed the carbs. I think that we can reuse these forks, and if we were to change the fork tubes, we would change the aesthetics, make it look a little shinier, but we wouldn't necessarily get any more performance out of it. In fact, we would not have gotten more performance out of it. So we're going for style and performance here, but I think we're emphasizing the performance of that 1,000 cc engine and the bike itself. We're not going to spend the money to buy new fork sliders. So let's start with the bottom cap. The bottom cap, I think, on these is not designed to come out. I took a look at the parts fiche, and the bottom cap will drop in here, and after it drops in, there's a circlip that will hold it in place. While it's different parts, the fiche does not call those parts out separately. It shows the bolts that go into it, but it doesn't show these parts separately. So I'm thinking that these were not made to come out. It's okay if they come out because obviously they're two different parts and someone put them together back in Germany in the 1970s or 1980s in this case, but they're not designed to come apart. I saw a little bit of residue of a glue on here. So we're going to use glue to put them back in, a sealant, but we had to take them out because we couldn't get the big bolt that goes through this hole out of the end of the slider that was in the bottom of the tube. So first we're going to put a little bit of glue on here. This is called Yama Bond, and it's an oil and fuel proof sealant that will enable the cap to seal well. Just going to spread a thin coat right on here using my finger. I have to have a rag handy. A thin coat there. And I'll put a thin coat on the inside of the tube here too. I'm going to do this more to the top because it's going to be pushed down as the piece goes in. And this will just enable it to seal a little bit because we don't want any leaks. And like I say, the part shows evidence of it having been glued in the beginning. So just a little bit of, tiny little bit spreading thinly in here. This material takes about 60 seconds to skin over. So we're going to let it skin over while we talk about the next thing we're going to do in here. I mentioned when I took them apart that there was an O-ring. I measured the O-ring. I could not find a BMW part because it was not designed to be taken apart, but I was able to order some fuel and oil safe O-rings online, and they came in as well. So we've got a 39 millimeter O-ring. That's 39 millimeter inside diameter with a 1.5 millimeter cross section. And that is going to help seal the oil as well. So I'm just going to drop this into position here. There's a little lip inside the tube. You'll have to take my word for it. You can't see it, but I'm just going to drop that in there. Then when the cap goes in, it will push up against that. And between the sealant that we're using and the O-ring, there should be no leaking. Now there's going to be two bolts that go into this cap as well, and we're going to have sealing washers on there, copper sealing washers on there. So it's been about a minute. We're going to set this on here gently, and we're going to push it in as straight as we can. There it goes. Drops into place. The groove for the circlip is exposed. I can see the O-ring inside here is in position. It did not move out of position. That sealant, it takes about 24 hours to fully seal. So we're going to let that seal before we put any oil into it, certainly. But we're going to put the circlip in next. So a circlip is just a spring clip. It's round. It's got a couple holes here. They can spring out or in. We use circlip pliers to spring them to open them up a little bit so that we can put them in there. We want to put them in there carefully. Last time when I was taking them apart, it was off camera, but I pulled this thing out. It was under tension, and it slipped off the pliers, and it flew around the shop. So we don't want that to happen. I'm going to set the clip up here on top. I'm going to put my hand over it so that in case it wants to fly, my hand is going to catch it. Holding it down. We'll squeeze it together. And it is in place. uneventful. I'm going to try to rotate a little bit to get it to a little different position so that it can accommodate or leave room for the bolt that has to go in there. Well, a tiny little bolt that has to fit. All right. In position. Actually, it may not be quite in position. I'm going to push down on this a little harder and see if it snaps in. May not be all the way. I'm just going to give it a little tap here and see if it will go in any further. Maybe I'll use a screwdriver on that. Okay, looks good. So it's in there. We got that cup in place. We have the hole there open. The sealant is going to do its job, and we're going to get a nice, good seal in there once again. All right, the next step is to put the seal on. Now, I talked about inventory and boxes of parts and ordering parts. I was going to order some seals. Before I went to the process of ordering, I double-checked all my parts, and I found some brand-new fork seals. So the fork seals go on this end, and the slider tube will move in and out. This is just a rubber flange on here, which will keep the oil, because we're going to have oil in here to dampen the shock movement. Oil dampens it. So we're going to put this fork seal in. We'll slide the tube in, and then when we put the oil in later, we'll be good. So this seal does not require a sealant, but I am going to put a little bit of oil. I'm just using some 3-in-1 oil here on the outside of this seal. Spread that around evenly. And I will put a little bit inside here as well. It's an exact fit, and we want to make sure that it goes in without doing any scraping. We don't want to do any damage to it. So we're going to put this up here and press the seal down gently. When it has to go in straight, oops, a little crooked, we'll pop it out and try again. It's going in pretty straight. We're going to use a socket that fits over the flange, does not impact the flange. We can begin to tap this in. It's moving in nicely. Almost all the way down. And there it appears to be all the way down. It's nice and even on top. Just give it a couple more taps just to make sure. It did not go in any further, so it is in as far as it needs to go. Okay, so we've got the seal, the oil seal on the top, we've got the cap on the bottom, and we're ready to put the fork tube, the slider tube, in itself. I'm going to oil up the inside of this lip a little bit, just so that this tube can pass in gently. We did not take the innards out of here. There was no need to. We cleaned them, flushed them. There's more parts in here that meter the oil as the fork tube slides up and down. So I'm going to push this in gently. Drops all the way down. And now we're ready to put in the large fork bolts. This bolt goes in the bottom and it screws into the piece I just slid in. Now this is also going through this cap, and of course that has to hold oil. So we have a copper washer These I did have to order. We could possibly have reused the old copper washers, but I think that it's wise to put a new one on if we have the ability, and we certainly do. So we're just going to slide that new washer over there, push this piece in here, and get it to thread. Threads are caught, and we will turn this piece in. Oops. This is a tricky part because it wants to spin inside. So I can pull it out and keep some tension on it, and it will hopefully begin to tighten up on us. Well, we don't have any movement there, but hasn't fully seated yet. This is the tricky part. Well, we're going to have to work on that one a little bit. It's just got a little further to go. Maybe what we'll do is take that out, make sure these threads are nice and clean. And try it again. So I can work on this offline. I'm going to try one more time while we're taping here. But sometimes it happens that things just require a little more finesse. And we don't want to take too much time on the video to do that. But I'll give you an update when I get it together. But let me try one more time here, and then we're going to go ahead and put the spring in. Let's try this again. I can feel the pieces beginning to turn inside. They're turning rather than the threads going in any further. Nope, it's definitely turning. There we go. So a little bit of pressure from the top. And I'll torque these later, but now the fork is together. The next step is to drop the spring in. That goes over the top. And then finally we have the cap. Now, I'm going to put the cap on. We're going to be taking the cap off again because the cap has to come off in order to put the fork into the triple. So we'll be taking it off again later, but I'm going to try to get them on at least temporarily here. And it's a little bit hard. Actually, we may have to do that offline too. That's okay. It's going to require a little bit of wrestling. And maybe I'll just leave them off until it's in the bike because we have to push down on this hard in order to get that to fit. So that's putting the fork tube together. This does require a little energy, and I think it's going to be easier if I do it and then report back to you. So I'm going to do the second fork, same as I did the first. We'll put this dust cap on, and we'll have forks that don't leak, and that will dampen our ride and give us a good, comfortable ride. I took the reflectors out like I spoke about last time. We're going to bolt our calipers up here, and we'll get it together. And it's our first subcomponent rebuilt. The calipers will be our second subcomponent. But when you build a bike, there's a lot of sub-assemblies. The forks are one of them. I cleaned the triple and the bearings. So that's all ready to go as well. We're getting various subcomponents done. We'll bolt them together, and we'll be ready to ride the bike. So that's it for today's show. Again, I'll report back on completion of the forks. Hope you're enjoying it. Please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's now available on Channel 96 here in Nashua, YouTube, and it's also out on Hulu. So if you have a chance to look it up on Hulu, please do. Search for Access Nashua. That's the name of the TV station here in town. And then you'll find the show under Access Nashua. We have more shows on there too. And please take a look at other shows that I've done, other shows that other folks have done here in town. Thanks. We'll see you next time.